A young man washes up on a beach, exhausted and delirious, briefly looking up to see two young children, Claire Gear and Magnus Nolan, playing in the sand before passing out. An armed guard, Tohoru Masamune, discovers him and transports him to a large seaside palace, where the proprietor, an elderly Japanese man, is informed of the stranger's arrival. The only items discovered on him were a handgun and a brass top. The old man lets the stranger in. He is dragged in and given food, which he struggles to consume as the old man picks up the brass top and says, "You remind me of someone, a man I met in a distant dream. He had some unconventional ideas." As the scene changes, the stranger looks up in realization. Dom Cobb, Leonardo DiCaprio, and his partner, Arthur, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, discuss their services with a prospective client, Saito, Ken Watanabe, in an eerily similar dining room, specifically, protection from thieves who specialize in extracting valuable information from a subject while they're dreaming. Cobb explains that one's mind is vulnerable to attack while sleeping, and that what he can do is train Sato's mind to subconsciously defend against extractors in order to protect whatever secrets he may be hiding. He backs up his claim by revealing that he is the most skilled extractor available and is well versed in all of the tricks involved. Saito, who appears skeptical, stands to leave, telling Cobb he will think about his proposal before exiting the room to join a small party in the main hall. As the room begins to shake, Arthur casts a glance at Cobb and says, "He knows." Arthur points to a woman nearby and asks Cobb what she's doing here as they walk to an outside balcony where other partygoers mingle. Cobb assures him that he will take care of it and that the job will be completed. He knows where Sato's secrets are. The moment Cobb mentioned the word, he glanced over at a safe. Cobb approaches the woman, who inquires whether he misses her. He responds that he does, but that he no longer trusts her. They retire to a private room, where Cobb ties a rope to a chair leg and throws the end out the window. He motions for Marion Cotillard, to take a seat as she inquires whether the children miss her. "I can't imagine," Cobb says after a brief pause. He then rappels out the window to a ledge below, almost falling when Mal gets up. As the lights in the room turn on, he breaks into the room below and opens the safe, swapping out the manila folder inside for another. He turns around with his gun drawn to see Mal pointing a gun at him and standing next to Saito and a guard holding Arthur. As he slides his gun across the table, Cobb asks Saito if she told him that you are here to steal from me, or that we are actually asleep. Saito responds. This is confirmed when the three of them are hooked up to a passive, portable automated somnocin intravenous device, which feeds them the sleep drug somnocin, keeping them all asleep and allowing them to share their dreams. Nash, Lucas Haas, another of Cobb's partners, keeps an eye on them. He checks on Saito, who is sleeping on a bed, before entering another room to check on Arthur and Cobb, who are both sleeping in chairs. Cobb's chair is perched above a tub of water. As a rioting mob moves down the street, there are more explosions and shouts outside. Inside the dream, Mal holds her gun to Arthur's head, but Cobb tells her the threat is hollow, handing the manila folder to Saito, because shooting him will only wake him up. Mal agrees, but says that pain is only in the mind and is perceived as real as she shoots Arthur in the knee, causing him to scream. Cobb leaps across the table, retrieves his gun, and shoots Arthur in the head. He then flees the room while under fire from Sato's guards. Arthur wakes up and tells Nash that things are falling apart, but Cobb still has time to finish the job before checking on Saito, who is still sleeping. As the dream begins to unravel, Saito frantically opens the manila folder and screams in rage when he discovers blank pages inside. Cobb manages to slip away for a brief moment to examine the contents of the real folder he'd hidden in his jacket, poring over the confidential files as the building collapses around him. As Arthur reaches under his pillow, Saito is crushed by debris and awakens in the apartment, unseen by Arthur. Arthur instructs Nash to awaken Cobb by kicking him. Cobb is pushed backwards into the tub by Nash, and as he hits the water, his dream is flooded with massive waves cascading through the windows before he wakes up. Saito grabs Arthur after reaching under his pillow for his gun, but is subdued by Cobb, who informs him that the file he stole did not contain all of the information he required. Saito laughs and claims that all of the information he had was in the file because he had been aware of Cobb's ruse the entire time. Cobb and Arthur were allowed into his mind as part of an audition, which they failed, with the remark, "Your deception was obvious." Cobb throws Saito on the floor and demands that he tell them everything they need to know about his expansion project, claiming that his employer, Cobol Engineering, will not accept failure. With his face pressed against the carpet, Saito begins to laugh again, revealing that he is familiar with the carpet's material. It is supposed to be made of wool rather than polyester. As a result, he concludes that he is still sleeping. Sure enough, Saito, Arthur, Nash, and Cobb are all sleeping in a train car, being watched over by a young man named Tadashi, Tylee Lee, who is keeping track of the time remaining on the PACE device. He puts headphones over Nash's ears and starts playing music to signal that their time is running out. The music is playing faintly within the dream, but Nash can hear it. As the rioting mob outside approaches, Saito praises Cobb for creating a dream within a dream, but is perplexed by his inability to control this dream. Nash reveals that they aren't in Sato's dream, but in his. The mob bursts through the door and assaults everyone in the room, and Arthur, Nash, and Cobb awaken on the train. Cobb scolds Nash, the dream's architect, for designing the carpet incorrectly and throws a wad of money at Tadashi before leaving, telling them that every man for himself. Saito awakens to find himself alone in the car, with the exception of Tadashi, who has resumed a casual pose but smiles wryly to himself. Cobb spins his brass top in his apartment and takes his gun, pointing it at his temple as the top spins. He breathes a sigh of relief and puts the gun down when it falls. When his phone rings, he answers it to find his two children, James and Philippa, Jonathan Gear and Taylor Gear, on the other end of the line with their grandmother. When they ask when he'll be home, he says he can't because of work. Cobb pauses and tells James that Mommy's not here anymore. When James asks if their mother is with him, an image of Mal flashing through his mind. Before their grandmother hangs up, he tells them to behave and that he'll send gifts with Grandpa. Arthur knocks on the door and informs Cobb that their vehicle is on the roof. Cobb decides to fly to Buenos Aires to lie low in lieu of their failed job for Cobol while Arthur says he's returning stateside. As they open the door to the helicopter and see Nash, beaten and bruised, and Saito waiting for them, Cobb asks him to send his regards. Nash apparently tried to sell out Cobb and Arthur for his own safety, but Saito has other plans. Cobb is offered a job performing Inception for him, which Arthur claims is impossible. Cobb, on the other hand, claims that it is not impossible but extremely difficult because it involves implanting an idea rather than extracting one. He turns away, insisting on resolving his differences with Cobol himself, but Saito then asks him if he wants to return to his children in America. He promises Cobb that if he is successful, all he has to do is make a phone call and the charges that are keeping him out of the country will be dropped. Cobb accepts out of desperation, much to Arthur's chagrin. They board the helicopter with Saito, while two thugs transport Nash to an unknown fate. On the way, Arthur explains the nature of Inception to Saito, explaining that simply planting an idea in someone's head does not guarantee that the idea will take. The subject may discover that the concept is not theirs and reject it. Despite Cobb's claims, Arthur believes that true inspiration is impossible. Saito explains why he wants the job. He wants the CEO of a competing energy conglomerate to split up his father's company, ensuring Sato's own Proclus global complete dominance over the energy production industry. Cobb agrees to do the job despite its difficulty. Saito drops them off at the airport and advises Cobb on team selection. Cobb travels to Paris to meet his father-in-law, Michael Caine, a university professor who taught Cobb and Mal about dream sharing and dream design. Cobb requests an architect who is as good as he is, and Miles refers him to someone better. He introduces Cobb to Ariadne, Elliot Page, a graduate student of his who is immediately put to the test by Cobb to design a maze that takes 1 minute to create and 2 minutes to solve. Cobb is impressed with her abilities, so he tells her more about his line of work and what she is expected to do. Her job as an architect will be to design dreams and virtual mazes for the subconscious of the dreamer to inhabit while Cobb and his team work. Cobb tries to make Ariadne aware that they are in a dream as they talk outside a cafe. Ariadne panics as she realizes what has happened, and the dream violently collapses. When they awaken, Ariadne discovers that they are in Cobb's warehouse workshop, where Arthur is keeping an eye on them. Ariadne is surprised when Arthur says they've only been there 5 minutes when it feels like hours. Cobb explains that because the mind functions faster in a dream, time moves more slowly. They sync once more, and Ariadne is given the chance to creatively alter the physics of the dream. Her architectural marvels cause the dream's inhabitants, projections of Cobb's subconscious, to seek out the intruder, Ariadne, like white blood cells drawn to a virus. Cobb recognizes Ariadne's mistake of creating a bridge from her memories, and his subconscious reacts as a mob, separating Ariadne from Cobb until Mal appears and stabs her. Cobb wakes up and rushes to the restroom as Arthur explains that Cobb's subconscious became aware of her as an invasive being and she was unable to wake up immediately due to the remaining time on the clock. Her only chance of waking up was if she died. Cobb pulls out his top and spins it, sighing as it collapses. Ariadne storms out of the warehouse, furious and refusing to open her mind to Cobb if his subconscious is as troubled as it appears. Cobb returns to the room and assures Arthur that she will return, but that he must travel to Mombasa to recruit an old friend for the team. He spots Eames, Tom Hardy, gambling in a bar and offers him a job as a forger/imitator on his team. Eames agrees before informing Cobb that he is being followed by 2 men at the bar. Cobb recognizes them as Cobol thugs intent on collecting the bounty placed on his head for the botched Saito job. While Cobb flees, Eames creates a distraction, leading the thugs on a chaotic chase through the city streets. At the last moment, Saito arrives in a limousine and picks up Cobb first, then Eames. He explains that he's been looking for Cobb in order to protect his investment. Eames takes them to a local chemist he knows who works with Somnasan and could be useful to their team. Cobb explains to Yusuf, Dilip Rao, that his job may necessitate the use of a 3-layer dream. Yusuf claims that if it weren't for a special solution he's concocted with a powerful sedative, this would be impossible due to the instability of dreams the deeper you go. Yusuf takes them downstairs to see dozens of men sleeping under the watchful eye of an old man to demonstrate its effectiveness, Earl Cameron. He tells Cobb that these men have come to wake up, that their dreams have become their reality. Their sleep is deep and stable thanks to the sedative, and they can dream for what feels like years. Cobb experiments with the sedative and is impressed with its effects, though he is shaken after waking up from a vivid dream with Mal. Yusuf is persuaded to join his team by him. Meanwhile, Ariadne returns to the workshop, telling Arthur that she intended to stay away but couldn't resist the pure creation that architectural dreaming entails. In a dream, Arthur introduces her to the concept of creating paradoxes, such as the Penrose steps. He also reveals that Mal was Cobb's wife and that she has since died. Despite Mal's malevolent nature in the dreams, her existence now only as a projection of Cobb's, Arthur tells Ariadne she was beautiful in real life. The team comes together and decides to create a 3-level dream, with the planted idea on the 3rd level. The intended victim is Robert Fisher, Cillian Murphy, the CEO and heir of Fisher Morrow, whose father, Maurice, Pete Postlethwaite, is deteriorating from illness. Eames seeks out Robert's godfather and business partner, Peter Browning, Tom Berenger, to better understand the father-son dynamic and to practice his impersonation skills. Because of their complicated relationship, the team decides that a positive idea, "My father wants me to be my own man," will trump a negative one in convincing Robert to split up his father's company. Saito oversees most of the plans and, because he wants full verification of any success or failure, decides that he will accompany the team into the dreams as a tourist. As the team prepares over the next few weeks, Arthur explains the importance of totems, which are small, personal objects that allow a person to distinguish between dreams and reality. Cobb's totem is his top, which falls over in real life but continues to spin in his dreams. Arthur's is a loaded die, and he orders Ariadne to make one for herself that only she can touch in order to ensure its validity. As her totem, she fashions a semi-hollowed bishop chess piece. To give themselves as much time as possible to complete the job, the team decides, with Sato's assistance, to perform it on a Boeing 747 during a 10-hour international flight from Europe to Los Angeles. This will give them a week in the dream's first stage. Saito reveals that he has purchased the entire airline, making the job easier and eliminating the need to buy out specific sections of the plane for access. Ariadne discovers Cobb dreaming alone in the workshop one evening after a day of planning. She hooks herself up to his machine out of curiosity and finds herself descending in an elevator. Cobb is sitting in a living room with Mal, who notices Ariadne's presence right away. Cobb gets up and joins Ariadne in the elevator, guiding her through some of the levels that Ariadne discovers are each specific memories, something he had previously told her not to do. Horrified after seeing Cobb's torment over leaving home without saying farewell to his children, Ariadne takes the elevator alone to the last level where she sees a hotel room, the contents of which are strewn on the floor. She steps on some shattered glass, and Mal looks up from his seat, wondering what she's doing here. Mal becomes defensive and picks up a shard of glass as Ariadne tries to explain that she simply wants to understand. Cobb arrives and returns Ariadne to the elevator as Mal rushes forward, accusing Cobb of breaking his promise. Ariadne and Cobb leave the dream, and Cobb explains that he is unable to return home because of Mal's death, which was thought to be the result of a murder. When Ariadne doesn't ask if he did or not, he thanks her, but she warns him that he's mistaken if he thinks he can cage Mal like that. He needs to let go of his grief over her death. Cobb agrees to let Ariadne accompany the team into the dreams because he needs someone who understands what he's going through. At that moment, Saito and Arthur arrive and inform Robert that Maurice Fisher has died and that the body will be returned to the United States in a few days. The group boards the plane and seats Robert in a sectioned-off first-class cabin. Cobb uses Arthur's pickpocketing of Robert's passport as a conversation starter, then drugs his water before proposing a toast in his father's honor. Robert falls asleep quickly, and the paid-off flight attendant, Miranda Nolan, assists in setting up and activating the passive device. The team as a whole descends into Yusuf's dream first. As members of the team are being picked up, it is pouring heavily in New York City. As part of the kidnapping ruse, Arthur and Saito commandeer a taxi, pick up Robert and Eames, and then Yusuf. Cobb and Ariadne follow in a separate car until a train barrels down the middle of the street, colliding with their vehicle and temporarily immobilizing them. When gunfire erupts on the taxi, the team is forced to make quick evasive maneuvers, hiding out in a warehouse where it is discovered that Saito has been shot in the chest. Robert is led away from the room, while Saito is placed on a table. Cobb stops Eames before he can shoot him to end his misery and wake him up, explaining that due to the sedatives they've taken, they won't wake up if they die. Instead, they'll be sent to limbo, a collective dream state of raw subconsciousness in which time is practically non-existent. This enrages the team, who wonder why they've taken such a risk as they consider what to do about the armed forces closing in on their location. They discover that Robert's subconscious has been programmed to fight extraction, and the projections that attack them are part of that defense. With Sato's condition deteriorating and the team unable to wait any longer due to approaching defense projections, the team decides to finish the job as soon as possible. Cobb admits to Ariadne that he has no control over his subconscious, and that he can't get Mal out of his head. He explains that they had been experimenting with dream states and wanted to see how far down into their subconscious they could go. They ended up in limbo together, unable to leave due to the remaining time on their passive clock. They rebuilt their lives over the course of several years. After a while, they began to accept limbo as their reality. Cobb and Mal committed suicide on train tracks after about 50 years to bring them back to reality. Despite returning to reality, Mal maintained that she was still dreaming and that dying was the only way to wake up, but she refused to leave without Cobb. She loved him too much. Cobb returned to the hotel room where they had always stayed on their wedding anniversary to find it trashed and the window open. Outside, on a different ledge, sat Mal, who revealed to Cobb that she had sent a letter to their attorney expressing her fear for her life, effectively framing him in the event of her death and forcing him to join her. Cobb refuses to jump and tries to reason with Mal, but she ignores him and jumps to her death. Cobb's case for his innocence has been overruled by the outstanding evidence against him since she declared herself legally sane by 3 psychiatrists. Cobb is forced to flee the country, leaving his children with their grandmother. Ariadne tries to persuade Cobb that Mal's death was not his fault and that he should concentrate on the mission. While Cobb and Arthur interrogate Robert, demanding the combination to his father's safe, Eames prepares himself as an impersonation of Browning. They use Browning as leverage to put pressure on Robert. Eames screams from another room, as if he is being beaten, before being brought into the room with Robert to try to jog his memory. He informs Robert that the safe contains an alternate version of his father's will, one that, if Robert chooses, will dissolve the company. Browning informs Robert that his father adored him and wished for him to create something of his own. As Robert's defenses close in on the warehouse, he reveals that the only word he could decipher from his father's final words was disappointed, convincing him that his father did not love him. With the warehouse under attack, the team presses Robert once more for a combination. Before they load him into a van and drug him to sleep, he tells them a series of random numbers that come to mind. While Yusuf drives the van away from the pursuing projections, they all get in and prepare to enter the second level of the dream. Cobb resolves to use Mr. Charles, a method in which he introduces the subject to the fact that he's dreaming in order to gain trust, in Arthur's dream. He meets Robert in a bar and informs him that he is there to protect him and that someone is attempting to gain access to his mind. By introducing the strangeness of their surroundings, he convinces Robert that he is dreaming and calms Robert to control them. He aids Robert in remembering that he has been kidnapped and leads him to a hotel room, the first few numbers of which correspond to the first digits Robert thought of for the combination, where the rest of the team gathers. In this level of the dream, Saito is in better health, but he soon starts coughing. Cobb persuades Robert that it was Browning who kidnapped him by asking if he saw Browning being tortured by the kidnappers in his previous sleep level. Browning admits that he was responsible for the kidnapping because Robert's Second Testament allowed him to destroy his father's empire, which Browning could not allow him to do. Cobb suggests that they enter Browning's dreams to discover what was really in the safe so that Robert can make his own decision. Robert agrees, unknowingly assisting in his own creation, and the team is reconnected, this time with Arthur remaining behind to keep an eye on them and administer a synchronized kick when the time comes. As the team enters the third dream, which is actually Robert's, Arthur is forced to fight off more of Robert's defensive projections, while Yusuf continues to drive the van in the first dream. The third dream takes place in snow-covered mountains, where Robert's safe is heavily guarded in a fort on the mountainside. The team splits up to distract the guards. Cobb travels with Ariadne, Eames travels alone to fend off the guards, and Robert and Saito begin ascending a mountainside to gain access to the fort's hidden side. Meanwhile, Yusuf loses control of the van for a brief moment and it tumbles down an incline, the tumbling effect transferring into Arthur's dream as he fights off Robert's projections, the environment around him spinning as gravity reverses and then right itself. As Yusuf drives further, he becomes trapped on an elevated bridge, with one car full of projections stuck behind him. Before driving backwards off the bridge, Yusuf plays music through Arthur's headphones to warn him of the impending kick. The force of impact sends Arthur flying in his dream, and as the van plummets in mid-air, there is a loss of gravity in Arthur's dream. The impact is also felt on the third level of the dream. As an avalanche sweeps down the mountainside, Saito and Robert are forced to cut their lines. Cobb realizes they missed the first kick, but there's still time for the second when the van crashes into the water off the bridge. Van drives off the bridge, 10 seconds left to impact. Dream 2, 3 minutes to synchronize the kick. Arthur struggles with a way to do this without gravity. Dream 3, 60 minutes left. With little time left, Cobb asks Ariadne if there is another way into the fort, and she relents, telling him about a secret underground entrance that Robert and Saito can access. Cobb sends them there while Sato's condition worsens. They finally enter the main room, where the safe is kept, while Cobb and Ariadne keep a sniper's eye on them. Saito, who has succumbed to his injuries, is left to lie down, coughing blood as Robert continues forward. However, as Robert comes into Cobb's view, another person does as well. Mal appears from the ceiling and shoots Robert before Cobb realizes his mistake and shoots her. Cobb and Ariadne rush to the scene as Eames is ordered to the room. Cobb declares the mission a failure after discovering Robert dead, because the only other place Robert could have gone is Limbo. Ariadne, on the other hand, persuades him that if they go into Limbo, they'll have enough time to find and bring back Robert. Eames agrees to use a defibrillator to restart Robert's heart while Cobb and Ariadne are unconscious. Meanwhile, in Dream Level 2, Arthur comes up with a novel plan. He connects the team with phone wires and leads them into the elevator. He lines the outside of the car with explosives and waits until the kick to use explosive force to create gravity and instigate a kick. Cobb and Ariadne are in Limbo, touring the deteriorating world that he and Mal once created. They pass by old houses and buildings before arriving at the one where Cobb believes Mal is. They'll find Robert if they find Mal, because Mal will want to use something Cobb wants to bring him to her. They enter the apartment, and Mal is waiting for them. She tries once more to persuade Cobb that his place in their real home with their children is with her, but Cobb reveals a terrible truth: the reason Mal believed her dreams were real. Mal had stored away a truth she didn't want to believe anymore while they were in Limbo, her totem, placed within her safe, lying on its side, immobile, telling her that her dream, her Limbo, was reality. Cobb broke into her safe and spun the top to convince her that this world was not real in an attempt to save her mind. He had no idea, however, that once they truly awoke, she would continue to believe that. This was how he knew Inception would work. He used it on Mal first, and his guilt over her death has plagued him ever since. He tells Mal that if she tells him where Robert is, he will stay with her in limbo, and she reveals that he is on the porch. Ariadne discovers him and pushes him away as an improvised kick. With Eames' help, Robert awakens in Dream Level 3 and opens his own safe, revealing an image of his bedridden father muttering his final words. Although Robert admits that his father was disappointed that he couldn't be him, Maurice says, "No. No. I was disappointed by your attempt." Maurice then points to a cabinet where Robert can find the will, as well as a paper fan made by his father for him as a child. Robert sobs as he looks up to see his father has died and the van hits the water. Dream 2, Arthur hits the detonator and the explosives force the elevator down, creating artificial gravity on the team. Dream 3, a series of explosions set by Eames rock the fort, collapsing the main floor. The synchronization of kicks pulls on Ariadne in limbo, and she calls for Cobb to join her. Cobb says he'll remain in limbo, but not with Mal. Saito has died and gone into limbo by this point. Cobb must track him down but promises to return. Ariadne leaps from the building side and rides the kicks back to Dream 1. Robert awakens in the van and escapes with Browning from the submerged van. Before fleeing the van, Arthur and Ariadne share an oxygen tank with Yusuf, leaving Cobb behind. Robert and Browning make it to shore, where Robert reveals that his father truly wanted him to be his own man, and that he intends to do so by liquidating his father's business. With the mission completed, Eames removes the Browning mask. Cobb washes ashore in limbo, where the armed guard discovers him. He is taken to a seaside palace, where an elderly Japanese man recognizes his brass top. Cobb recalls his purpose for being there and calls Saito, asking him to return with him and honor their agreement. Cobb's gun is reached for by the elderly Saito. Cobb awakens on the plane and is startled to see Arthur and Ariadne smiling at him. He looks at the now awake Saito, who remembers and picks up the phone to dial. Cobb walks nervously through customs in Los Angeles, where security checks his passport but allows him to pass, welcoming him home. Cobb walks past the rest of the team and Robert, who pauses for a split second as if recalling a half-remembered dream. Cobb notices Miles calling him over ahead of him. Cobb pauses before pulling out his brass top as they drive home together. As his children approach the back door, he spins it on the kitchen table. He rushes to them, overjoyed to see their smiling faces again, as the top continues to spin, wobbles a little, and the screen goes black. The film's final scene is a little more complicated than the current synopsis, see above, suggests. The top continues to spin, wobbles a bit, indicating that Cobb has returned to reality. The actual script, written by Christopher Nolan, differs. The script concludes with: behind him, on the table, the spinning top is still spinning. And we. Please subscribe my channel. Thanks for watching.